Welcome to Sola Church Online.
I'm Alan Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers, and together we lead Sola Church, a life-giving church in Santa Monica, California.
We meet in person and online on Sundays at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Our in-person service is held indoors at Joslyn Park Auditorium, which is at 633 Kensington Road.
And our pre-recorded online service can be found on our website, solachurch.life, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. That's at Sola Church LA.
And we have a great service for you today. Let's worship.
Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, your perfect love is casting out fear. And even when I'm caught in the middle of the storms of this life, I won't turn back, I know you are near. And I will fear no evil, for my God is with me. And if my God is with me, whom then shall I fear? Whom then shall I fear? Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go in every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. And I can see a light that is coming for the heart that holds on. A glorious light beyond all compare. And there will be an end to these troubles, but until that day comes, we live to know you here on the earth. And I will fear no evil, for my God is with me. And if my God is with me, whom then shall I fear? Whom then shall I fear? Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go in every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go in every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. Yes, I can see a light that is coming for the heart that holds on. There will be an end to these troubles, but until that day comes, still I will praise you. Still I will praise you. Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. Oh no, you never let go through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. Lord, you never let go.
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If you're just checking us out today, please don't feel obligated to participate in that. But if Sola Church is your church home, or these online services have been a blessing to you, it's super easy to make a one-time tax-deductible donation, or even to schedule a recurring gift.
The easiest way is to scan the QR code on your screen, but you can always go to solachurch.life and click the tab at the top that says Give.
Yeah, I just want to let you guys know we've got a men's breakfast coming up, those of you that live in the area. And we'd love for you to join us. It's Saturday, November 23rd at 8 a.m. We're going to meet on Santa Monica Beach near Lifeguard Tower 20. We have a generous sponsor who has sponsored the event, so there's no cost. We're going to have breakfast burritos and coffee, but you do have to register, and you can do that online. Just go to our website, solachurch.life, but add / Sola-men. It's that easy. / Sola.men. You won't find it looking through the menus. You'll have to add that in, type that in. But you can register there. We're gonna, have breakfast. We're gonna have a little bit of worship. We're gonna just have an inspiring time, some fellowship. It's gonna be really great. So join us.
Let's get into our time of teaching.
So I've been telling you guys that one of my favorite TV series of all time is Breaking Bad. I've watched it beginning to end twice. And if you're like the only person in America who hasn't seen it yet, there is a little bit of spoiler alert in this introduction. You might want to forward past the introduction, but the story revolves around the transformation of the protagonist, Walter White, from a mild-mannered high school chemistry teacher into the feared drug lord Eisenberg. What we see along the way is that he was super gifted, but that gradual moral compromise led to a downfall. And there was lots and lots of collateral damage. The question at the end is, would there be a final act of redemption? As you come to the series finale, what's going to happen? Is there going to be any self-awareness on his part? Is there going to be any self-sacrifice on his part? Like, is there any redemptive thing that he can say or do at the end? Well, there's a story an awful lot like that in the Bible. A story about someone who was an anti-hero, someone with wasted potential, and his name was Samson. So let's go ahead and turn to Judges chapter 15. We do still need to finish our future-proof series in 1 Thessalonians. I'm reminding you now that we took a break from that while our in-person services were moved outside. The place where we meet, Joslyn Park Auditorium, was used as a polling place this last Tuesday. And so we have not had access to the auditorium for the last 2 weeks, and we won't have access this week either. So we wanted to do something unique while we were outside, thus the Breaking Bad series. Let's pick it up in verse 15. The Samson story is well underway as we come to part 3 of 3. It says in verse 1, after a while, in the time of wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, let me go into my wife, into her room. But her father would not permit him to go in. Her father said, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her. Therefore, I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them. Then Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and he took torches, turned the foxes tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails. When he had set the torches on fire, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines, and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. So, little bit of review. In the book of Judges, we see this recurring cycle where the people sinned and suffered, and until now, they cried out and were delivered. The way they were delivered was that God would raise up a hero called a judge to deliver them. And so in this cycle, it's a little bit different because it doesn't say that they cried out or that they were ever fully or finally delivered. But this deliverer that God raised up was a man named Samson. Now, we learned that Samson was a Nazirite. What that means is that he had taken a vow to separate himself to God. The Nazirite vow involved 3 things. No wine, grape juice, grapes, or raisins. So anything that grew on the vine. 2, no haircuts. And 3, no dead bodies, meaning you couldn't come in contact with a corpse or a carcass. That would make a Jewish person ceremonially unclean. They wouldn't be able to worship corporately at the tabernacle unless they went through a ritual cleansing. So the Nazirite vow meant staying away from that altogether. Normally, this vow was a 30-day vow, sometimes 60, sometimes even 90 days. Rarely was it a lifetime vow. like it was in the case of Samson. And in looking at his story these last couple of weeks, he's already broken 2 of his 3 vows, right? He's already been in a vineyard, into a drinking party. That's the first vow. He's already had contact with a carcass. That's the second vow. The only thing he hasn't done yet is cut his hair. And so in chapter 14, last week, we saw that Samson had experienced this unbelievable betrayal at the hands of his fiancée. And after thinking it over, he had lost his cool. He had left. He was sort of like, he left her standing at the altar, so to speak. But after thinking it over, he decided to return and to claim his bride and to consummate the marriage. And so it says in verse 1 that as a gesture, he brought a young goat. How weird is that? Apparently, a young goat about 3,000 years ago was something like flowers and candy today. If any men watching this online service have a first date this week, I do not recommend taking a young goat. It just seems like a really bad strategy to me. But when he gets there, he gets the Heisman, right? Like, her dad isn't letting him in, isn't going to let him see her. It's bad enough that she's moved on. It's still worse that she's moved on with his best man. Yeah. Ouch. So maybe just as a sidebar, we could say that, the book of Judges is rough. It is rough. Being over 3,000 years removed from this story, it's really hard for us to relate to a lot of it. One of the things that we see frequently, though, is the mistreatment of women. And I just wonder whether or not the sisters overheard this conversation that their dad had with Samson. Take her instead? I wonder what the younger sister thought, like, Dad, I'd like to have something to say about this. She wouldn't have had anything to say about it in the ancient world. And then better than she? Well, what did the older sister think when she heard that? Like, Dad, how could you say that? Well, to get even, Samson committed an act of arson. He had to catch 300 foxes, or more likely jackals. The Hebrew word could be translated either way. And because jackals run in packs, that seems a lot more likely. Imagine trying to tie them together at all, much less with torches between their tails. We can't even trim our Yorkie's nails. Like, she goes absolutely ballistic. I'm not sure how Samson pulled this off, but he did. So, as a result, of course, their grain, their grapes, their groves of olives all went up in flames and up in smoke. Now, I don't know how many people watching this online service are share their food people or not share their food people. Like, how many of you like to give someone a taste of your food at a restaurant? You like to get a taste of their food at a restaurant? Okay. And how many of you don't want to share your food? Yeah, that's me. Like, I'm sorry that you ordered the absolute worst thing on that menu, but this right here is mine. Don't touch this right here. Don't mess with my food, is what I'm saying. And so, that would have been how the Philistines would have felt, like, oh my gosh, you did not just mess with our food. You did not just destroy our food supply. So in verse 6, Philistines, upset, understandably, they said, who has done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. Oh my. To get even, Samson had committed an act of arson, and then to get even, the Philistines committed an act of murder. They burned the woman and her father alive, probably setting the house on fire. It's interesting because that's the very thing they had threatened to do to her in chapter 14 if she didn't betray Samson. So it's ironic that, after betraying Samson, that ends up being the way she dies anyway. Picking it up in verse 7, it says, Samson said to them, since you would do a thing like this, I will surely take revenge on you. And after that, I will cease. Famous last words, right? So he attacked them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. Then he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Edom. So to get even, he'd committed an act of arson. To get even, they'd committed an act of murder. And now to get even, he, commits this slaughter. And in verse 7, he does say, after that I will cease. It never ends. It always goes on and usually escalates. I think about the words of Paul in Romans 12, verse 17, repay no one evil for evil. Too many people will repay evil for good. That's not good. And most people would agree. But lots of us would justify returning evil for evil. We have the bumper sticker in our car, I don't get mad, I get even. But the calling in the scriptures is to return good for evil. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that we're prohibited from defending ourselves. Self-defense is a legitimate thing, but what it does mean is it means non-retaliation. So how do you respond when people hurt you, when people sin against you? It's never ending, as we said before, and usually escalates. So that's why in verse 8, Samson found a natural stronghold, a cleft in which to hide, because he knew what comes next. And so verse 9, the Philistines went up and camped in Judah and deployed themselves against Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? So they answered, we have come up to arrest Samson, to do to him as he has done to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom and said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this you have done to us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. But they said to him, we have come down to arrest you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. Then Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves. So they spoke to him, saying, no, but we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hand, but we will surely not kill you. And they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against him. Now let's stop right there. I know I didn't read the whole verse, but we'll double back to that in just a little bit. Rather than an invasion, this is more like an extradition. When you think about the judges, these heroic people, these deliverers that were raised up throughout the book, Samson was by far the loneliest judge. He never gathered an army, but an army was gathered. And I think that that's something to maybe reflect on for just a moment. Leadership guru John Maxwell said, he who thinks he leads but has no followers is only taking a walk. Like, look behind you. Is anybody following you? Then you're not a leader. So in that respect, Samson, failed as a leader. Not only did he fight by himself, but he fought for himself, which raises a good question. What battles are you fighting? If you're fighting a battle of some kind right now, is it God's battle or is it your battle? Are you fighting for God's glory and the good of people around you, or only for yourself? Well, so we see Samson here cooperating. Why did he cooperate? Well, granted, he could have gotten out of this, but by cooperating, he saved 3,000 lives. I mean, one way he could have gotten out of this is that he could have killed them himself. By not killing them himself, he saved 3,000 lives. He also could have cooperated by simply escaping, but then the Philistines would have killed the 3,000. So when the Philistines came shouting at the end of verse 14, or the beginning of verse 14, it was on. So picking up where we left off in that 14th verse, it says, then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds broke loose from his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand and took it, and killed 1,000 men with it. Then Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. Like, was he rapping? Was this a freestyle or what? And so it was when he had finished speaking that he threw the jawbone from his hand and called that place Ramoth Lehi. Yeah. So this fresh jawbone, being a fresh jawbone, it would have been like teeth and all, killed 1,000 Philistines with it. Now, you could argue that he once again broken his Nazirite vow by even touching this thing. But man, imagine, like sometimes people play that game, would you rather? Like, would you rather die this way or would you rather die that way? I can tell you one way I would rather not die, and that is being bludgeoned to death with the fresh jawbone of a donkey. Just saying. So Samson was a little bit of a poet there in verse 16. If we were filmmakers, if we were making a movie, I imagine that the fight scene would look sort of Matrix style, maybe anime vibes. But then throwing the jawbone, I mean, that would have to be slow motion for full effect, right? Oh, man. Ramoth Lehi literally means jawbone heights. Yeah, and I'm just thinking that what we really need right now, we need like an apartment complex or a planned community called Jawbone Heights. Just throwing that out there. So verse 18, then he became very thirsty. So he cried out to the Lord and said, you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised? So God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out, and he drank, and his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore he called its name En-Hakkore, which is in Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Now this is the first recorded prayer of Samson. If he took undeserved credit in verse 16, he gives deserved credit here in verse 18. And you notice he says he's going to die of thirst. Now, I don't know how thirsty he was. He was probably pretty thirsty. I doubt that he was at death's doorstep. I mean, some of us are serial exaggerators, right? We say that we're bored to death, that we're scared to death, that we're starving to death, that we're tickled to death, that we're worked to death, and of course, dying of thirst. Across the world, there are actually hundreds of millions of people who do not have access to clean water. And in ancient times, that was a huge problem. Certainly, everyone reading the book of Judges in ancient times would have readily identified with this particular issue. And maybe that's why so many times in the Bible, thirst is used as a metaphor. Like all of our physical appetites, even cravings, we might say, are placeholders for God. Even thirst is a reminder that our deepest needs aren't truly physical, but are spiritual, and that we're only human, and that there are things we need that we can't even do for ourselves, that we need God. Well, you notice that the water came out. And that tells us that our physical needs are legit. I just talked about how thirst can be a metaphor for our need for God, but our very literal thirst is legitimate, and God cares about our needs. And God is always working to meet our needs. Moving into chapter 16, we're covering a lot of ground today and moving quickly. Now, Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. When the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, in the morning, when it is daylight, we will kill him. And Samson lay low till midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two gateposts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Now there were 5 key cities in Philistia: Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. And Gaza was the southernmost of the 5. So, we've talked again about Samson being behind enemy lines, so to speak. And how God might say, Samson, what are you doing there? But although we're not told why he went, we're told what he did. He hooked up with a harlot. This is a reminder of why we can take the Bible seriously. There are many, many reasons, but here's one. And that is that the Bible tells us the truth about people. The Bible doesn't seek to present its heroes in the best light. It shows them to us warts and all. And here it tells us what Samson was doing in Gaza, hooking up with a harlot. Now you notice that phrase in verse 1, the elliptical phrase, Samson saw a harlot. It's reminiscent of the way chapter 14 started when it said, Samson saw a woman. This is the story of his life. And Samson knew better. What he's doing here is prohibited in Leviticus 19, verse 29, Deuteronomy 22, verse 21, clearly prohibited in the Torah. But though Samson was physically strong, he was morally weak. Now, the plan for the people coming for him, their plan was to pull an all-nighter at the gate of the city. Now, ancient cities were walled for protection. The gates were open during the day, but closed during the night. But beyond that, the gates not only, served as an entrance during the day, but they served as the city hall. So to disrespect the gate of a city was to really disrespect the city in the ultimate way. This was a pretty impressive feat by Samson physically, but also pretty embarrassing, for the Philistines and for the residents of Gaza. This goes way beyond, like, say, kidnapping a mascot or something. Like, this is so much more than the Bruins kidnapping USC's Traveler, or say the Trojans kidnapping UCLA's Joe or Josie Bruin, right? Well, verse 4, it says, afterward, it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Hey there, Delilah. You'll have that in your head the rest of the day. You're welcome. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So notice that phrase, Samson loved a woman. Yeah, just like chapter 14, verse 1, Samson saw a woman. Just like chapter 16, verse 1, Samson saw a harlot. Of all the women in Samson's life, Delilah is the only one who's named. That's interesting, right? We don't even know his mother's name. But she lived nearby in the valley of Sorek. She was almost certainly a Philistine based on what happened in verse 5. And though she and Samson were never married, they apparently were living together. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing. Can't spend a lot of time on it, but I'll just touch on it briefly. It's commonly understood that marriage is sort of a 50-50 proposition. I mean, couples getting married have about a 50% chance of remaining married and maybe a 50% chance of getting divorced. I mean, that's been frequently said. You could pick that apart and analyze that, but people have frequently talked in terms of there being half as many divorces as marriages and maybe a couple having a 50-50 shot. But I've known people, and I bet you have known people too. Maybe they were the children of divorce. Maybe their siblings have had bad experiences with marriage. Maybe they're friends. And so sometimes they'll say things to me, to you, like, well, I mean, I don't want that to happen to me. When I get married, I want it to last. I want it to be for life. I just want to get married one time. So we think it makes sense to live together first to see, whether or not this can work out, whether or not this has staying power. Now, again, there's lots and lots that could be said about this, and I'm not even getting into all that. I just want to make one simple observation, and that is that, if the average couple getting married has about a 50-50 chance of making it, couples who live together before they get married, their odds are even 50% worse than that. I mean, that's just statistics. That's just what the stats show. I'll let you decide what to make of that, but it's something to sit with, something to think about. So remember, we talked about there being these 5 main cities. Each city had a lord, thus the 5 lords. And they made her an offer she couldn't refuse. So moving very quickly now, I'm going to read, but I'm just going to make little observations to get through a whole bunch of verses to get closer to the end of the chapter before we run out of time. In verse 6, so Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies and with what you may be bound to afflict you. Subtle, right? She just openly says it. And Samson says to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, that is, tendons from an animal, again, the Nazirite vow would have prohibited this, not yet dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and she bound him with them. This must have amused Samson, knowing that it couldn't possibly work. Now men were lying in wait, staying with her in the room. And she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. Likely the Philistines, hadn't even revealed themselves when they saw that it hadn't worked. So the secret of his strength was not known. And that was the first attempt. Let's look at the second, verse 10. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Look, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now please tell me what you may be bound with." So he said to her, "If they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." I mean, should have known, right? Therefore Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And the men were lying in wait, staying in the room, but he broke them off his arms like a thread. So again, likely didn't even reveal themselves. And now the third attempt. Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with." And he said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom." Ooh. See, he's still not giving it up, but he's getting dangerously close now. I mean, he's really playing with fire. So she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he awoke from his sleep. This must have been sleep through anything, guy. Like, how in the world had he slept through this? And he pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. So I guess he's got parts hanging from his hair. I mean, how slow was Samson? How could he not be suspicious by now? Either he just didn't take any of it seriously, or he really is a perfect example of someone who's all brawn and no brain. But aren't we sometimes the same way with temptation? We don't take it seriously. You know, even though we keep going a little farther and a little farther and a little farther, we think we can play with fire and not get burned. But in the end, we all get burned. Starting in verse 15, then she said to him, we're going to slow down a little bit now. Then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies." And it came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all his heart and said to her, "No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." Oh, Samson, what are you thinking? Now, you know, it really wasn't about the hair. The hair wasn't like Popeye's spinach. It was about his devotion to God. And his hair was the last remaining symbol of that devotion. Would he give his heart to God or to the girl? He chose to give it to the girl. In verse 18, when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart." Excuse me. So the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hand. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." So he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Then the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. Well, I mean, how sleep through anything? Guy slept through this. I have no idea. But he awoke from his sleep and look at his words. "I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free." It's the classic "I can handle it" vibe, right? This won't hurt anybody. I'll only do it once. I haven't had any for a long time. I'll be careful. I can quit whenever I want to. I can handle it. And the worst part is, quote, "he did not know," end quote. And that's the problem. That's the problem. We don't know until it's too late. You know, we don't realize that we've gone too far until it's too late. We don't realize fully the consequences until it's too late. But you know what? If verse 20 is filled with despair, verse 22, yeah, it's filled with hope. Verse 22 has been referred to as a literary gem. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. You know, it could be that you're in a season of your life, as I have been at times in my own life, where you've got the shaved head. You know, I'm speaking metaphorically. I'm talking about a time in our life when we've crashed and burned. A time in our life when we've made a huge mistake, or perhaps a series of huge mistakes. A time when we've lost something, when we've lost maybe everything. A time when maybe we're filled with regret. A time when we'd give anything to have a do-over. You know the kinds of times that I'm talking about. And in times like that, there's that new growth, you know. If you've been living with a shaved head lately, metaphorically, I want to ask you to metaphorically run your hand over your head right now. You feel that peach fuzz? Yeah, that's hope. That's a new beginning coming its way. That's a comeback on its way. Look at verse 23. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to rejoice. And they said, our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy. When the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who multiplied our dead. So it happened when their hearts were merry, that they said, call for Samson, that he may perform for us. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he performed for them, and they stationed him between the pillars. Oh my. It's bad enough that he hadn't brought glory to God. Worse than he had inadvertently brought glory to Dagon. Now he's not Samson the deliverer. He's just Samson the entertainer. In his shame, they were entertained. He'd gone from being a champion to being a comedian. In verse 26, then Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars which support the temple so that I can lean on them. Now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, about 3,000 men and women on the roof watching while Samson performed. Then Samson called to the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. In some ways, imperfect though this may be, in some ways there's what we might think of as recommitment on Samson's part. You know, God had a call in his life, a call for God's glory, a call for the good of the people that he was to lead. And in this moment, he re-embraces that call. Again, imperfectly, but re-embraces it still. There's just that little bit of self-awareness that he desperately needs God if he's to have any opportunity to sort of redeem himself in terms of this calling and this God-given role. This is the second and last recorded prayer of Samson, and his words include the phrase, remember me. Makes us think of the thief on the cross, right? And God did just that. In verse 29, it says that Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one in his right hand and the other in his left. And then Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he pushed with all his might. And the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his life. Wow, the body count. You know, Samson sacrificed his life. And again, in doing so, he was in some imperfect way re-embracing his role, recommitting himself to God's call on his life to be this deliverer, in some way protecting his people. I mean, they thought Samson was harmless. It just makes me think about my life and maybe about yours. We can come to a place in our life, as I have, where, people may think we're harmless. People may think that God's done with us. That God's done with his call on our lives, that he can no longer use us, that he no longer wants to use us. Do people think God is through with you? Again, I've been there, because of what I've been through, because of my divorce and losing everything and going through what I went through, 15 years ago. There are people who thought then that God was done with me, and who maybe still think now that God is done with me, that God can't use me or wouldn't want to use me, but he's using me. And my ministry is different now than it was then, largely because of what I've been through. And it gives me a whole different ability to empathize with people and to connect with and minister to people. Maybe the same thing could be true for you. Maybe whatever you're going through right now is going to actually become this thing that's going to compel you going forward. That's going to actually transform what ministry looks like for you going forward, what God's call in your life looks like going forward. And maybe many people are going to be blessed, because that's what God does. God brings beauty out of the ugliness of our lives. But again, they thought he was harmless because he was blind, but that's the very thing God works through. He works through our brokenness. And so verse 31, and his brothers and all his father's household came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoah. He had judged Israel 20 years. So the Hebrew word brothers can refer to relatives of any kind. As far as we know, Samson was an only child, but I love the tenderness with which his relatives came to take care of his dead body. And it's interesting too, the place where they buried him. They buried him in the first place that it tells us in Judges 13 verse 25 that the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him. And so it ended where it all began, and it came full circle. It's interesting that when we get to the New Testament, in Hebrews chapter 11, we have this chapter that we call the Hall of Faith, or the Faith Hall of Fame. And there are so many names there, but one of those names is Samson. Yeah, Hebrews 11:32, Samson is found in the Hall of Faith, in the Faith Hall of Fame. Even a Samson who broke bad is memorialized as a man of faith, as someone who God used. And I just want to say to everyone watching this online service that, we too can be those women, those men of faith. Have our lives been messy? Yeah. Have we ever broken bad? Yeah. Would we love to have a do-over on this or that? Do we have any regrets? Yep. And still, God loves us. And still, God forgives us. And still, God renews us. And still, God wants to use us, working in us and through us. Are you ready for your comeback? It starts here. It starts now. It starts with this prayer. Father, I just pray for everyone watching this service, but especially those who are maybe discouraged right now, broken by something that they've done or something that's been done to them, feeling hopeless. Lord, I pray that you would flood every heart with hope right now, that you would help us to believe again and to understand that you're not through with us yet. As long as we're waking up another morning, as long as our hearts are still beating, as long as we're still drawing breath, there is an opportunity, even if we've broken bad in some way. There's an opportunity for us to move towards you, to move towards our future, to see you work yet again for your glory and our good. In the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray and celebrate that and embrace that and invite that. Amen.
And now it's time to fill out a Connect card.
Go to our website, solachurch.life, and scroll to the bottom of the homepage. That's where the Connect card lives. You can let us know that you joined us online today. You can also request information about our virtual small groups.
And don't forget, go and follow Sola Church on social media.
Right? Everybody's favorite sites. Just look for Sola at Sola Church LA, and there we are.
And we hope that everyone has a great week, and we will see you next time at Sola Church Online.
Bye, everybody.